Has this ever happened to you? Do you have a broken garage door spring? In this video, we will show you how to replace 2 torsion springs on a garage door. First, establish a safe work environment. Replacing garage door springs is dangerous. Always wear safety glasses. Unplug the cord to the garage door opener and disengage the opener from the door. On LiftMaster openers, pull the rope down and away from the door. Gather the proper tools: a pair of 1/2-inch winding bars taped 1 inch from the ends, a sturdy step ladder, 1 or 2 vice grips, open end and socket wrenches, a file, a tape measure, and an oil can or 3-in-1 oil. Next, measure your old springs and your new springs. Measure the length, wire, and check the inside diameter. This is to verify you ordered the correct springs. On this door, we will be installing higher cycle springs, so the new springs should last longer than the customer's original springs. Loosen the set screws on both winding cones so the ends recede from the 1-inch hole. Place the spring with the red winding cone at the left end of the door and the spring with the black winding cone at the right side of the door. To ensure the door levels properly when finished, mark the drums and torsion shaft at each end with a file or marking pen. Do not grab the shaft or drum. Now it's time to unwind your unbroken spring. Gather your tools and center the ladder beneath the wound spring and just to the inside of the winding cone. For safety, keep your head and body away from the path of the winding cone at all times. It's now time to unwind the unbroken spring. When unwinding the spring on the right, insert a bar into the winding cone with your right hand and listen for a click. Never touch a set screw without first inserting a properly fitting bar into the winding cone. And never attempt to wind or unwind a torsion spring with a screwdriver. Before loosening the set screws, test the torque of the spring. To do this, grip the lower end of the winding bar with your right hand and raise it until the cables loosen. This will let you identify the torque you will be holding. Continue gripping the winding bar as you loosen both set screws with a 3/8-inch open-end wrench in your left hand. Properly tightened screws will loosen with less than a turn, but additional turns may be required. As the screws loosen, torque is transferred to the winding bar. Grip the end of the bar as you lower it with your right hand to the top strut of the door and rest it there. Grip the lower end of the second winding bar with your right hand and insert the other bar into the next hole. Raise this bar just enough to pull the lower bar out of the winding cone with your left hand. Lower the second bar with your right hand to the top of the garage door as you did the first bar. Follow this procedure precisely. It's the only procedure that will allow you to keep your head and torso away from the path of the winding cone in the event it should explode. Repeat these steps until the spring is completely unwound. Remove the bars from the strut and lay them on the floor. The next step is to loosen the torsion hardware. Center your ladder under the broken spring. Loosen and remove the 2 bolts that secure the center stationary torsion cones to the spring bracket. Turn the bolt heads rather than the lock nuts. Flange nuts are very difficult to loosen. Separate the stationary cones from the center support bracket. If the spring bracket is slotted, vice grip the bracket as shown to secure the shaft to the bracket. This will prevent the shaft from rolling out and damaging the garage door or shaft. It will also help prevent injury. Test the shaft to assure it can't slide out. Slide the right spring out toward the cable drums. Loosen the set screws on the winding cone of the broken spring. Slide the left spring toward the left drum as well. Leave the bushing from the stationary cone next to the spring anchor bracket. The two-spring system requires only one bushing. Reposition your ladder and remove the cable from the left cable drum. To prevent the cable from getting tangled, insert the end of the cable into the hole of the hinge below the top section. Loosen the set screws on the cable drum until the drum turns freely. Slide the drum away from the bearing plate and examine the shaft and bearing. If the bearing has worn ridges into the shaft, or if the set screws have left raised metal, file the shaft. Slide the shaft to the left about an inch. Reposition your ladder at the right end of the garage door. Remove the cable from the drum and insert the end into the hinge below. Loosen both set screws on the right cable drum and slide the drum to the left. Check the bearing and file the shaft as needed to allow the shaft, drum, and spring to slide. Now it's time to replace both springs. Pull the shaft to the left, restrain the end bearing plate if needed to allow the shaft to slide completely out of the end bearing. Remove the right cable drum and position it between the track and flag bracket. Remove the right torsion spring. Since most garage doors have limited side room, you'll probably need to bend the spring while removing it. Install the new torsion spring on the shaft, bending it as needed. Slide the right spring over the tube. Notice the black paint on the winding cone. This is a left wind spring, and it's installed on the right side of the garage door, looking at it from the inside of the garage. Slide the spring to the left toward the center support bracket and slide the right cable drum onto the shaft as shown. Insert the shaft into the end bearing plate and slide the shaft to the right until the marks on the shaft line up with the bearing as shown here. Reposition your ladder at the left end of the door. Slide the shaft to the right. Remove the left cable drum and position it between the track and the bracket. Slide the left spring off the end of the shaft. Install the new torsion spring, bending it as needed to get it onto the shaft. Notice that this winding cone is marked with red paint. It's a right wind spring, and it goes on the left side of the garage door when looking at the garage door from the inside the garage. Slide the spring to the right toward this bracket. Install the left cable drum onto the tube and slide the shaft to the left and into the bearing until the shaft is in its original location. At this point, it's time to secure the torsion hardware. Align the mark on the cable drum with the mark on the shaft made earlier. Finger tighten the drum set screws. Rotate the drum on the shaft slightly each way to allow the set screws to turn further into the indentations of the shaft. Test the set screws. If the set screws are properly seated, you will not be able to turn the drum. Tighten each set screw an additional 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn. Before attaching the cable, bend the end so it seats correctly in the drum. Install the end of the cable in the drum. Insert the cable in so the tip is flush with the edge of the drum and it cannot scrape the end bearing plate. While gripping the cable drum with downward rotation to keep the cable tight on the drum, vice grip the tube as shown to keep the cable tight on the drum. The top of the vice grip should be tight against the header. This will keep the shaft from turning when you tension the springs. Taping the top of the vice grip will prevent the grip from scuffing the drywall. Position your ladder at the other side of the garage door. Bend the end of the cables as before and insert the end of the cable into the drum so the tip is flush with the rim of the drum. Slide the drum to the right and rotate it until the cable is tight. Check to make sure the tip fits properly inside the slot in the cable drum. Slide the drum to the bearing and pull the shaft to the left if needed. The marks should line up. Finger tighten the set screws. Test the set screw fit by trying to turn the drum on the shaft. It should not turn. Tighten the set screws an additional 1/2 to 3/4 turns. At this juncture, both cable drums are secure, but the components in the middle are loose. It's now time to secure the torsion springs in the middle. Center your ladder below the spring anchor bracket. If your bracket is slotted, remove the vice grip and lube the shaft next to the bracket. Next, raise the shaft slightly and position the race of the bushing on the center support as shown. The tabs on the stationary cones often break when the race of the bushing or bearing bind against the bracket. Slide the left stationary cone over the bushing, being careful to keep the race of the bushing on the bracket. Slide the right stationary cone to the bracket, aligning the holes of the cones with the slots of the bracket. Insert the 2 bolts and screw on the 2 nuts. Check again to confirm the bushing is still seated properly. Finger tighten the 2 bolts until both cones are flush with the spring anchor bracket. Check the centerline measurements of the shaft near the drum and adjust the shaft in the middle to the same distance. Tighten both bolts. Now it's time to tension the new springs. We'll start with the left spring. Position your ladder under and just to the right of the winding cone. Mark the shaft about 1 inch beyond the winding cone. Spray a line of paint across the length of the spring. Insert a rod into the winding cone with your left hand and listen for the click. You'll need to listen for this click every time you insert the bar into the cone. And watch the tape to determine if the bars are completely inserted into the holes. With your left hand, push up on the bar just over 90 degrees and insert the second bar with your right hand. Lower the second bar to the top reinforcing strut of the garage door with your right hand and remove the upper bar with your left hand. Switch hands and lift the lower bar with your left hand and insert the other bar with your right hand as before. Follow this procedure exactly. It's the only way to keep your head out of the path of the winding cone should it explode. Repeat this procedure to wind the spring. Notice that the spring grows in length as you turn the winding cone, as you will notice the cone covering the mark made earlier. As you wind, count each quarter turn until you reach 30 quarter turns, or 7.5 complete turns typically needed on 7-foot-high doors. You can also count the spaces between the paint marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and more is 7.5 turns. Before tightening the set screws, you'll need to stretch the spring about the thickness of 1 coil. Mark the shaft about 1/8 of an inch beyond the winding cone. Next, with your left hand, pull the bottom of the bar up and away from the top of the door, and at the same time pull the bar toward you. While pulling on the bottom of your bar with your left hand, tap the top of the bar with the second bar until the cone moves to the mark. The spring may dip slightly in the center. Finger tighten each set screw until it meets the shaft. With the 3/8 open end wrench in your right hand, tighten each set screw an additional 3/4 of a turn. Remove the bar. It may be necessary for you to push up on the cone with the other bar. Test the set screw adjustment by pulling down on the bar. The door should rise a few inches as you do this. If not, tighten the set screws another 1/4 to 1/2 turn. Remove the bars. Reposition your ladder at the left end of the door. Reach up and remove the vice grip from the shaft. Adjust the vice grip and secure the track about 3 inches above the middle roller to help protect you later if the springs are too strong. Now it's time to tension the spring on the right. Reposition your ladder and mark the shaft just beyond the cone and paint the spring as before. Follow the same procedure as before for winding this spring, except that here you will raise the bar with your right hand and position the second bar with your left hand. Listen for the click each time you insert a bar into the cone. Notice that the length of the spring extends as you turn the winding cone, and notice the cone twisting over the mark made earlier. As you wind, count each quarter turn until you reach 30 quarter turns, or 7 1/2 complete turns. As before, you can also count the gaps between the paint marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7.5 turns. Mark the shaft as previously. With your right hand, raise the bottom of the bar and pull it to the left. Stretch the spring as before by tapping the top of the bar. Finger tighten the set screws and tighten the set screws an additional 3/4 of a turn as before. Now it's time to test the operation of the door. Slowly pull down on the winding bar until the garage door rises an inch or so. The door will usually stay or drop to the floor. If the door rises by itself, the springs are either overwound or the springs are too strong. This could be a very dangerous situation. You'll need to do additional testing to ascertain the cause of the problem. If the door stays on the floor, remove the vice grip from the track. Raise the garage door slowly to check the balance. If you have the right springs, the door should stay down when closed, open at the halfway point, and open when raised completely. If the door is heavy, add a quarter turn of tension. If the door is too light in the middle position, remove a quarter turn of tension. If that doesn't remedy the problem, additional testing may be needed. Lubricate both springs with 3-in-1 oil or a heavier 30 or 40 weight oil. Do not oil the last inch of each spring. This could cause the spring to spin off the cone. In addition, failure to oil painted springs often causes premature breakage. Re-engage the opener. Pull the rope toward the garage door and slide the outer carriage over the inner trolley. Plug in the power to the opener and check the operation of the garage door. I hope this has been helpful. I'm Dan Music. Thank you for watching.